So I'd like to speak a little bit about one of the aspects of the fourth foundation of mindfulness. But before I do that, I'd like to take a step back and review the four foundations because I see a really nice build-up to the fourth foundation, which will hopefully become clear as I describe it. So the first foundation of mindfulness is mindfulness of our body. And we cultivate mindfulness of our body by bringing our attention to our posture. So we notice how our body occupies space and time. And we also use our breath as an anchor for our present moment experience. The second foundation of mindfulness is mindfulness of feelings. And in this context, it's not feelings as we think of traditionally emotions or even feelings in our body per se, as we're referring to what are called Vedanas, or feeling tones. And there are three feeling tones, pleasant, unpleasant, and neutral. And as we cultivate mindfulness of our experience in our body, we begin to notice that there's always a pleasant, unpleasant, or neutral quality to the experience that we're having. The third foundation is mindfulness of citta. And citta is a term that can be, it's a little bit tricky. It's an integration of our mind, heart, and body into one entity. And it's the source of the interplay between feelings and thoughts. And we cultivate mindfulness of citta by noticing how wholesome or unwholesome states impact our relationship to reality or experience. And then the fourth foundation is mindfulness of Dhammas. And Dhammas can be translated into truths. I like to think of them as laws of nature. So in the same way that there are certain laws that govern physics and chemistry and so on, the Buddha, as the great physician, does a really wonderful job of, just like a scientist, explaining and describing the nuances of human experience. And he starts off by describing that all experience that we have is ultimately experienced through our six senses, six sense doors as they're called. And the six sense spheres are our five traditional senses, the ones that we learn in grade school. So sight, smell, touch, sound, and taste. And then the sixth sense in this context is thought. So the six sense spheres are further divided into internal and external spheres. The internal ones refer to basically our body parts, or the organs that do the sensing. So our eyes, our nose, our tongue, our skin, our ears, and our brain, or our mind. And they're referred to as sense bases. And each sense base has a corresponding external sense sphere, or a sense object, which allows experience to happen. So our eyes need to pick up visible form. So that would be the sense object for the eyes. Our ears pick up sound. So sound is the sense object for our ears, and so on. And he describes how experience requires the sum of those. It requires both of those pieces to come together in order for there to be experience. So for example, our ears on their own don't constitute experience, and sound on its own doesn't constitute experience. We need our ears to come into contact with sound in order for us to have the experience of hearing, what we would label as hearing. And it sounds really simple on the one hand, but it's incredibly profound, because he also points out that it's in that moment of contact that all of our suffering or our joy, that's the origination of suffering and joy, is in that moment of contact. And to illustrate that, we notice, for example, that when we say something, when we refer to a sensory experience, we'll typically say things like, "That sounds beautiful," or "That looks really ugly." If we were being truly mindful, truly, strictly speaking, just observing and noticing the reality of what's happening, we would simply say, "That sounds," or "That looks." but we immediately inject some kind of qualifier into it. So again, the beautiful or the ugly, it's difficult for us to express the experience of a sensory experience without that qualifier. And it's that qualifier that happens unconsciously and immediately. So those feeling tones, pleasant, unpleasant, and neutral, it seems almost like they are an instantaneous, integral part of our experience. And so in the fourth foundation, as we cultivate an awareness of how experience unfolds, we try to take a step back and simplify it and strip out or simply notice how the Vedanas or the feeling tone is something that we add into the experience. So when my ear comes into contact with sound, I may find a specific sound, let's say some music, really beautiful, whereas someone else who's picking up that exact same sound may describe it as ugly. And therein lies the fundamental, the simplicity, but also the profundity of the teaching, which is that the suffering or the joy isn't to be found in the sense base or the sense object. It's found in the contact, and we're the ones that inject the meaning into that. And so one of the ways that we can practice this, the practical implications of the teaching, is that when we meditate, we can begin to cultivate the raw knowing of experience. So we can sit on the cushion and pick up a sound, and we begin simply by labeling that hearing. So we notice the experience minus the feeling tone or the judgment that gets injected into it. Simply noticing that I'm having the experience of hearing or smelling or even thinking. Then we can layer into it the feeling tone. So now we bring additional awareness to it, and so we notice that hearing, unpleasant, tasting, pleasant. And by doing so, we're cultivating a true form of mindfulness, a very different contact with reality that allows us to interrupt the habitual patterns of the judgments and the stories that we typically unconsciously layer into any experience. So the practice is quite simple, yet has really profound implications in that we can become much clearer about what actually is happening. My ears are picking up sound. The fact that it feels unpleasant to me, or the fact that I now have thoughts about how this person should stop making these sounds, or I wish the sound would go away, is something that I'm layering into the raw experience. And by simply observing that and knowing the underlying mechanism of how that experience unfolds, empowers me to let go, to not get caught up in it.